Well, I mean, I've been acting since I was a little kid, so the pre ones I can't tell you, but I do remember the local theater company, Pioneer Theater Company in Salt Lake City, was doing Romeo and Juliet, and I was so into it that I just wanted to be like Peter the Page, or just anything they would let me do. So I went, and they said they needed a picture, and I used my, 7th grade school picture, the wallet size one, and I went onto the stage. They told me to find the light, which I thought was very good advice in general. And I went up on the stage, and I did the entire Queen Mab speech, because I memorized it for school. Oh, that I see Queen Mab has been used. And now I think back to being like a seventh grader, and the director of the piece, who also ran the theater company, came out in the lobby and said, we work with, we're affiliated with the university, so we cast students in these things, but I hope when you're ready to go to college, you'll consider coming here and working with us. He really took the time to let me know it was not me, be perfectly happy to let me be Peter the Page, but to come back. And I did go to school there, and I did work for him many, many times in many musicals, so there you go. I do a lot of concerts. It's my favorite thing. I've actually invested a lot in that recently, in terms of taking maybe a piece that's been arranged for my trio in the past. You have an arrangement for that. You take that and have somebody orchestrate that into something that's played by 70 pieces. In fact, 35 to 70 pieces. It varies kind of by the project. But I have a Sam and Delilah, which is from Girl Crazy, that I do. It's one thing to hear it on like ba-dum, blah, on a piano, but to hear that coming out of like trumpets, trombones, an entire brass section, it's unbelievably exciting. It's really what I hope to do more of, because it's more in the spirit of what I think those performing that Broadway stuff is. You don't get 36-piece orchestras on Broadway anymore. You get 9, 10, 11. 6 in some cases, so that sound, just, you can still get that with an orchestra. There's a place where it's done, and that's where it is. So I love it. I love it. Well, I sort of get asked that sometimes, and I've heard other performers talk about it a lot. To me, I don't really worry about it very much. What happens for me is I just think it's important to fill the space you're in. So if you're in a relatively small room with 70 people and we're being sort of intimate, that's one thing. I don't have to pretend there's a person there when there's not a person there. If there's a person there, I play to them. On the other hand, if you're in a 2,000-seat concert hall and you really try to include everybody, just including them takes care of the difference. So I think there are real, technical adjustments that you might not do one of those, with 70 people, where it might actually be appropriate in a big concert hall. So I think it's all just it's being appropriate to the moment. And it can be the same material in different settings, but I think it's kind of easy to figure out. I don't see it's much of a difference. It's just being yourself. That's a good question. I mean, in terms of Vernon Duke, I had this great success with my Merman show. And then I was like, well, what do you do after that? Merman at the movies, Merman, and then I was like, maybe you ought to just leave her alone for a second. And I think in 2003, Vernon Duke, it was the Vernon Duke centenary, the 100th anniversary of his birth. And so I was doing the show at the Algonquin of all kinds of anniversaries that were happening that year. And I thought, well, I'll get like 4, I'll get 3 or 4 Vernon Duke songs, so I have them, and I'll perform them in this show, whatever. And I did do that, and they were just, I think I did 3 numbers, and I just fell in love with him. Mostly this idea that every famous Vernon Duke song, because people go, they don't know who he is, but they know April in Paris, they know Autumn in New York, Taking a Chance on Love. I Can't Get Started. I mean, these kind of great songs that are standards. Well, when I found out that every single one of his famous songs was from a Broadway flop, not just a flop, but like big, enormous, tragic story flops, then I started looking into it. He was also a classical composer that went by the name Vladimir Dukelsky, but he really wanted to write for Broadway, and nothing really ever took off. Eventually, these songs will be picked up like a generation later, and Bunny Berrigan made I Can't Get Started a hit, or Count Basie with April in Paris. I mean, these songs certainly don't need me to champion them, but I thought it was fascinating, this really like smart white Russian who emigrates to America to write songs like Swanee. Just, it doesn't really work. It's kind of a dangerous angle to come at a show. Like, I want to explore failure. I want to celebrate failure. But it comes off a lot more fun than that. I mean, that's not it. But I just love it. As soon as I found the hook into it, then I used Bob Grimes here in San Francisco, Mr. Sheet Music, Mr. Brilliant. I sat with him for days. I took home probably 3 feet, stack copies of Vernon Duke songs. If I liked the lyric, if Bob and I liked the lyric, we put it in that stack. I took it home to see, if we liked the melody. And we just built a show like that, and then I loved it, so we did an album, a studio album with strings, and it's beautiful. That's kind of unsung about what I do. That needs a little more attention, actually, that show. So go buy that one. That's a gorgeous album. And then with Hoagie Carmichael, I have a good friend, Barry Day, who's like an expert on Noel Coward, go figure, likes me, and he loves Billy Stritch. He said, you guys would be great together, and you'd be great doing Hoagie Carmichael material. He took us to lunch. He gave us Hoagie Carmichael songbooks. And miraculously, we opened our calendars and penciled in some dates about 9 months in the future. We put a show together, and we loved it. That's been a couple years. And now Billy and I are just off. We do our Hoagie Carmichael. Now we're doing a lot of Johnny Mercer. This is the Johnny Mercer centenary this year. So I just kind of, as it comes, I sort of just wait for, like, what's going to be, I don't think of myself as like a great interpreter, like, oh, I'm so important as an interpreter of American song. But I do think I have like a unique take on putting things in context sometimes. And I find that people like to have these songs put in a context. It makes it mean more to them. Because a lot of this is getting left behind. I mean, I get amazed when I go around and do my Merman show. People don't know who Ethel Merman is anymore. Then I talk, and that used to freak me out. Then I would find out they didn't know who Gershwin. They didn't know George Gershwin. I said, you know what? This isn't their fault. I'm not going to get antagonistic towards them. I'm going to get really cheerful about bringing all of this into a very, like, entertaining, fun, funny, smart retelling of some of this stuff and setting it in a context so people can find it. That's certainly what happened with the, especially the Vernon Duke, because I mean, the famous ones are all there, but then there's lots that sound like they should be famous, that you kind of know, then ones you really don't know, that's like, now why don't we know that one? So I enjoy that. It's like a detective, it's like a detective story, sort of putting it all together.